When it comes to success with regenerative agriculture, the first thing we have to change is the way we see things.
He was talking with a neighbor, big grain farmer, kind of struggling, not sure what to do. Spring's coming and prices weren't great. And, the bank is on him and all this. And he just depressed. That neighbor down the road was struggling and having a hard time and unsure and anxious. And our producer was sitting there enjoying his farm. This is sort of his words, enjoying his farm, thinking about all the possibilities. And the reason for that was just that he looks at his farm differently now.
After that, regenerative agriculture works everywhere, even in challenging northern environments. But sometimes that changing the way you see things is what helps you make it work more profitably in those challenging environments.
The easiest way to winter water cows is to have them eat the water in the form of snow. It works very, very well. But if you don't believe it, well, then you should spend money and put in a winter water system. And there's many people don't believe cows will do well in snow, and I'm not going to spend my time arguing. Let's design a winter water system. And there is some very, very creative ideas from, no energy at all to solar energy with electric eyes, continuous pumping systems, all kinds of really neat ideas of how to keep water moving in our cold climate so that cattle can drink. But the cheapest of all is to let the animals eat snow. The key is you have to have movement. They cannot stay in the same spot all the time. They have to have access to fresh food.
We're going to discuss all that and more today on the Working Cows podcast for episode 443 with my guests today, Michael Thiele and Blaine Jurtis of Understanding Ag. And this episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined today by a couple of members from the team at Understanding Ag, Michael Thiele and Blaine Jurtis, and we're going to talk to them about making regenerative agriculture work in northern environments. They are both from Canada, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and they have been doing it there successfully, and not only doing it, but also coaching and helping others get started and obtain success themselves with regenerative agriculture. So we'll talk to them about that right after this word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. As farmers and ranchers, we've all heard pitches from ag consultants about the next great new product that will increase our yields, pounds, or animal performance. And each of those silver bullets comes with a price tag that you pay year after year, taking more money out of your pockets and putting it into someone else's. Our friends at Understanding Ag aren't out to sell you anything, but the knowledge to grow healthier soils, plants, animals, and profits. Their goal is to help you become your own best manager, a short-term client, but a long-term friend and partner on the road to regeneration. If you're still waiting for that next year that's going to be better, maybe it's time you give Understanding Ag a call. Check them out at understandingag.com. I know you'll be glad you did. Blaine, Michael, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Nice to be here today. Thanks for the invite, Clay.
Yeah, and talking about does Regen Ag work in the north? So just how far north are we talking here? I guess we should maybe start by establishing that.
Well, I'll take at the
go.
captain. I believe it works anywhere in the world. It's context driven, so you need to decide. You have to figure out what works in your situation. It doesn't really matter where you are on the planet; it will work. It's just working with natural systems.
Certainly.
Yeah. So Blaine and I are in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, so we're on the prairies. If we're talking about Canada, really, we have to be a little more specific. That the work Blaine and I are doing is in Manitoba and eastern part of Saskatchewan. So yeah, we both live kind of southern part of the provinces, so we're within a couple hours of the U.S. border.
Certainly. And when we talk about does Regen Ag work in the north, maybe we should define the term work. What do we mean by that?
Well, right. So really, it's when we say work in agriculture, usually we mean is it making us money? So that's part of it. But really, there's the other side of that is the ecological side or the soil health side. So in our minds, it has to do both. It has to work, make you money, profit, um, and it has to advance soil health and regeneration. And when we start to talk about regen ag, then we're talking about not just regeneration of soil, but regeneration of the farm and the farm family and communities. So it's been wonderful to be a part of that and to work with these farms and farm families and to see them grow and change has been a real honor.
Yeah, certainly, unsurprisingly, the most downloads from any one country for the Working Cows podcast comes from the United States, but Canada's always second. There are a lot of people there that are paying attention, but I think that as we think about the majority of the audience being south of the Canadian border and really Texas actually is the state that downloads the podcast the most. And so I think a lot of times there's that perspective of, well, north of me, it's colder, shorter growing seasons, more snow maybe, depending on the year, and just all these, we're talking understanding ag here today, all these compounding and cascading challenges that seem to be stacked up against, producers in environments north of us. And I'm not immune to that way of thinking, as I'm in South Dakota and start to think about people north of me and some of those challenges. So can you just talk to me about some of the challenges as you see it, but then also kind of the way that you guys have gone about working in the context that you find yourselves in?
I guess one of the things that, we do have long winters, but we also have the same amount of sunlight as at the equator. So all our sunlight comes in May, June, and July, which is the growing season. And so that gives us a huge advantage over someone farming in southern climates. And so that's our unfair advantage, I guess. So people that come up here, they cannot believe the length of days we have this time of year, plus how fast plants grow. So we can grow things here within 100 days that, probably in Texas would take 130 or 140 days to grow the same plant. So Mother Nature just, she knows that we're further north, so things have to go quicker, and so we just have to understand that and adapt our farming styles to make that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I hear that a lot from people in Canada specifically about the longer days in the growing season and that being a helpful advantage. How does that change your approach? How does that affect the way that you go about managing the different opportunities that you have?
I guess I would say that it's normal for us. So I don't know if we change anything. It's just the way we've always lived here, I guess. So to us, it's normal. But I suppose somebody coming, somebody from Texas was going to start farming here. One of the things that would happen really quickly is that they would learn that seeding dates are critical. Frost-free periods are critical. And so you don't seed in July, you seed in May here. If you have bad weather, inclement weather, that creates big challenges. And then you have to change what you're going to do. You have to go to a shorter season crop or maybe wait and sow a winter annual. And if you can't get your spring seeded crop in because it will not mature in time. So I guess we're just very aware of that 120 kind of frost-free period. And, that's just part of our context. And we just know how to deal with that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd add to that our frost-free period. One of the jokes up here is we, have a 100-day growing season, 100 days frost free, just not sometimes all in a row. We do get late frosts or early frosts. But if you think about, so we have to pack a lot of growing, a lot of life, a lot of, ecosystem into 100 days. So if you think about it in the context of the soil health principles, one of them being keep a green plant growing as long as possible. We need to get things green as soon as possible and keep it green and build a system around, that principle of the only way, if you think about that green plant is photosynthesizing, converting solar energy into carbohydrate that either produces grain or grass. So we're trying to help producers to utilize that principle. And whether you're, like I say, growing grain or grass, that applies. And fundamentally, your yield and your profit is a function of how many days of green plant and photosynthesis you can capture in a growing season.
Just one more point on that, Clay, is that we've used 120 days a couple of times here, Michael and myself. But what we teach farmers, especially grazers, is that we have the potential to capture sunshine here for 260 days. Basically, it's from snow to snow. And we're also learning that there is a process called subnivean photosynthesis, which means that life continues on under the snow. Granted, it's very slow, but there's actually photosynthesis occurring under snow. And we also know that mycorrhizal networks do not shut down even in our cold conditions. They still function in the winter if we have healthy soil. That's the key. And so, we talk about the 100 days or 70 days if you're growing wheat or canola. Basically, that's all you're capturing sunshine. And so what we're doing in the regenerative movement is trying to get guys to understand that and figure out what else they can grow either before, during a relay, or after the 70-day crop to lengthen out that growing season. So we're capturing more sunshine and feeding more microbes. That's how we'll build soil health. To capture it longer. Keep it green as long as possible.
And what have been kind of some of the things that you've seen as far as the ability of, those plants to be photosynthesizing? Can you give me examples or stories you're aware of people who have been photosynthesizing maybe outside of what other people thought was possible?
Well, I've been in the cow and grass business for a long time and practicing regenerative grazing over 30 years now. And I've observed photosynthesis middle of March, and I've observed photosynthesis as late as the 7th of December in Saskatchewan, Canada. So, that's well over 260 days now, not every year at the same times, but I've seen that, so that's one example. Winter crops are a great example up here, especially fall rye or winter triticale are very hardy winter crops. And they'll stay green right till the snow comes. And as soon as the snow melts, they're green again. So, that they're capturing sunshine. So those would be the two best examples that I could give.
Michael, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, like that's just a wonderful place to start. If you're a, typical prairie grain farmer, wheat, canola, soybeans, and to add a winter cereal is just like probably number one place to start. And then from there, you can just get so creative. Like really, the only limit is your imagination, and that's been sort of wonderful to watch producers sort of think through this. Like, okay, what can I do? So we've just had all kinds of interesting examples, like flax and red clover. So flax and red clover planted in the spring, harvest the flax, and then the red clover regrows in the fall. You catch that fall rain that we normally get. Flax is a forb, red clover's a legume. You get a bit of nitrogen fixation. You keep it green. It overwinters, and then you have a decision to make next spring. Do you let the red clover continue to grow that following year for hay or seed production. You can terminate it and go back into your crop rotation. So you just have lots of interesting options. An example on the canola side would be canola with, say, a ryegrass, Italian ryegrass or perennial ryegrass, planted together again. So, but not an intercrop. That's the complication with, say, like peas and canola, is now you're harvesting two crops, and that does add complexity. But if we're just thinking about keeping it green, so say Liberty Link canola with Italian rye or perennial ryegrass, harvest the canola. Again, you catch that fall rain, the ryegrass regrows nice and green in the fall. If you have some critters, you can get them out there fall grazing. Another wonderful way to stack enterprises and increase profitability and soil building, right? Another principle, you're integrating livestock onto that piece of cropland that may have not seen a grazing animal now for over 100 years. So there's all that benefit. And then again, next year, say the perennial rye looks good next spring, you can leave it, contract it with a local seed company and harvest it for seed production. So there's just like endless kind of interesting examples of how guys have just really been creative and thought through how to, implement the principles.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. Are rising input costs keeping you up at night? At Understanding Ag, they help producers like you save money and build resilience through regenerative agriculture. Their team of experienced farmers and ranchers will show you how to reduce reliance on costly fertilizers, pesticides, and feed by working with nature, not against it. With proven regenerative practices, you can improve soil health, boost water retention, and increase your land's productivity while cutting expenses. From grazing plans to cover cropping to full system redesigns, they tailor solutions to your land and your goals. Let them help you make the transition from input-intensive, conventional, to profit-enhancing regenerative agriculture. Visit understandingag.com and take the first step toward a more profitable and sustainable future.
Yeah, and I don't know about in your neighborhood, but it seems like grazing standing corn is a more common practice in Canada than other places in the world. Is that something that you've seen done? And do you?
Yeah.
Is that a great strategy or one that's at least on the table?
Oh, it's been huge. So, we started up here with corn grazing back now, maybe it's 20 some years ago, short, growing day corns that would grow up here in southern Manitoba, and that was great. Mainly for winter grazing was the thought there. But then, you quickly realize that corn's fine and all, but it's not a complete source of nutrition for a cow. It is incomplete. It's high energy, low protein. So we've developed, again, producers being super creative. We've done things like bringing up, we call them forage soybeans. They're basically just long heat unit varieties that have come up from like Louisiana and Texas that up here never produce seed. So we're putting them underseeded with the corn, and can be used for grazing or silage. And then even another step further is to then add in more diversity, even still, with a little sprinkle of everything from flax to hairy vetch to go down the list. So we're getting a lot of diversity and a lot of success with that. Like hairy vetch has been another one, corn and hairy vetch. Used with Roundup Ready corn, hairy vetch can take a little bit of glyphosate without it gets sick, but not too much of it dies. And then by the come fall, you've got a jungle of hairy vetch under that corn. The corn can be harvested, and then you can graze the stover and the vetch, or for winter grazing. And now you're implementing another principle of diversity, right? So now, plus integrating the livestock onto cropland, and so that's actually been quite a large success up here in Manitoba and moving into Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I was going to say, Blaine, do you have a similar experience in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, it's the same exact thing.
Yep.
There's no difference other than the border.
Yeah, that was an imaginary line anyways, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
What are some other things? I mean, we think about challenges of watering livestock, some of those things, and I think that lends itself to more creativity, right? Which is kind of the theme that we're talking about here is creative ways to just uh, take advantage of the place you're at. So, can you talk to me a little bit, Blaine? You said you've been working with cattle for a long time, and what are some of the ways that you've managed that challenge?
Well, the easiest way to winter water cows is to have them eat the water in the form of snow. It works very, very well. But if you don't believe it, well, then you should spend money and put in a winter water system. And there's many people don't believe cows will do well in snow, and I'm not going to spend my time arguing. Let's design a winter water system. And there is some very, very creative ideas from, no energy at all to solar energy with electric eyes, continuous pumping systems, all kinds of really neat ideas of how to keep water moving in our cold climate so that cattle can drink. But the cheapest of all is to let the animals eat snow. The key is you have to have movement. They cannot stay in the same spot all the time. They have to have access to fresh snow. But in our part of the world, we usually have reliable snow for 3 to 3.5 months every winter. Occasionally on the shoulder seasons, late November, early March, you may get caught where the snow gets totally iced up, and you may have to haul water for a few days until spring truly comes or winter truly comes and the snow appears. But usually it's pretty darn reliable. Out of the number of years I've done it, I can only count on my hand a few times that I've ever had to haul water.
How frequently are you talking about moving them when you're trying to keep fresh snow?
Well, it would depend on how many cattle and the size of the area. But once the cattle step on it, then it freezes down. And so then that makes it much more difficult. So as long as, they have new areas to walk into to collect snow, then it works just fine. You just can't have 1,000 head on a very small area and expect that to work. That will be a disaster. You have to, most people are moving anyway for bale grazing or swath grazing or whatever type of feeding system they're doing. So the cattle are always moving ahead, whether, chaff piles or any of these ways of feeding cattle. So it works very well.
Talk to me a little bit about, like, does it make a difference what they're eating, how much snow they're going to need, or any of those things, like certain sources of energy and protein are going to be drier or have more moisture in them, and is that going to impact what they need for snow?
No, I don't think there's a lot of difference there. So they're hardy and tough, and they will balance out. If they're eating, especially swaths or chaff piles or things like that, where they're down on the ground, they're consuming a lot of snow with each bite of forage. If they're eating bales, that's a little bit different. Then they have to move away from the bale and lick snow. And you'll see that if you're bale grazing, you'll see the cattle off a ways and they're just standing there licking snow, and they do just perfectly fine.
You just keep that in mind when you're building those paddocks that, hey, they're on these bales. They need some extra area that doesn't have bales on it that they can get to with snow.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. Michael, anything to add there as far as water is concerned?
Mentioned chaff pile grazing. It may be interesting just to explain that a little more. So we have producers now that say they're growing oats, spring seeded annual crop. They underseed it with a winter triticale or fall rye, both seeded in the spring together. Harvest the oats, and when they're harvesting the oats, they have a bunch piler on the back of the combine. It's a very simple unit. It's just weighted with a lever. The chaff and the straw kind of piles up, and when it reaches a certain weight, it just dumps, and then you get a little pile behind the combine. So when the combine's done, when harvest is done, there's a bunch of little chaff piles out in that field. And if you think about just the chaff, it's high quality and and you're now bunching up the weed seeds. If you think about one of the issues with how we harvest crops right now, we're blowing the weed seeds, whatever goes into that combine. Those weed seeds get blown across the countryside. Like, we're actually doing the weeds a service by spreading them. Whereas if you put them in the bunch piles now, the cows consume them. Some of them, go through the gut and are destroyed and are no longer viable. And they're a source, they're also now a source of feed. You're making money, whereas chaff otherwise is just kind of something you're trying to get rid of. It's just a pain. And then, the fall rye or winter triticale regrows after harvest, and you get the cows out there. They have something green to graze, plus the chaff piles. And it's just been a super effective way, again, to get livestock out on the land that otherwise wouldn't have seen a grazing animal in a long time. Plus, you're utilizing a source that otherwise is more just a cost, and now you're making money growing beef. So that's
using the waste of one
Yeah.
enterprise and feeding it to another one. So that's just incredibly profitable when you do that.
And also nutrient cycling through the cow back onto the land in a way that's beneficial.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So just I think Understanding Ag would call that a compounding, cascading effect.
Yes.
Yeah. Alan Williams would be proud. Yeah.
Yeah. Other places might refer to that as a self-licking ice cream cone. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but good anyways. Do you think that there is one particular principle of soil health or rule of adaptive stewardship or ecosystem process that's particularly in need of attention when we talk about managing in the North?
I wouldn't say one, I would say all. I think they're all equally important. I think you run into trouble when you start to say, well, I'm just going to focus on this one thing.
Certainly, but
we have to look at it as a holistic system,
right,
and we have to manage everything.
Right. Are there any that are particularly challenging, I guess maybe is a better way to ask it?
Well, maybe I just start by saying that you have to have the mindset that you're trying to build a system. So take your typical prairie grain farmer again, wheat, canola, soybean rotation, and they would say, well, I have a system. And I don't mean to pick on them, I'm just trying to make a point, is that that is not necessarily a system. For example, if you look at just no-till or zero-till, in the context of the principles, what principles does that meet? Minimizing disturbance. Okay, you're minimizing soil disturbance, tillage. That's great. You're keeping the ground covered, soil armor. Excellent. But really, the other principles, not so much, typically. We've sort of broadened that and think about now like zero-till plus. Okay, so zero-till, wonderful. But zero-till plus all the principles, zero-till plus cover crop, zero-till plus trying to keep it green longer, more diversity, integrate livestock, all of it. So building that system is, and that's of course where I come back to mindset, and it's difficult to kind of wrap your head around that and I had to go through my own kind of reprogramming to understand that. So, for example, if you look at a lot of zero-till fields that have been no-till for a long time, 30, 40 years, they're not actually that impressive. And guys that we're working with, they're like, well, okay, what's going on? They're a bit disappointed when they finally get out there and start digging around. Lack of aggregation, poor water infiltration. No, that rich earthy smell is not there. When you do, say, a PLFA test, there's not a lot of soil biology activity, and you'd be like, well, why? Because I'm doing no-till, I'm keeping the ground covered, it's not blowing away, it's not washing away, but you're not keeping it green long enough to pump enough carbon back into that system to rebuild the soil carbon and feed the biology and rebuild aggregation, which now increases water infiltration. So you can start to see how it's all interconnected. But if I was a prairie grain farmer and, kind of regen curious, where would I start? It would be with keeping it green longer, for sure. And just getting that, say, winter cereal, start with that. And then next would be think about how you could start to reduce nitrogen fertilizer. And there's some good opportunities up here in Canada right now with programs and funding available to help guys start to go down that path and figure it out on their own. One of the things we're really push is sure, try something. You've got a problem and it's like, hey, Mike, what should I do? Our job is to not tell producers what to do, but to help them figure it out and then test it. Do a check strip. Like, so the nitrogen example, do your full rate that you normally do, but do a half rate and a zero rate. And then don't just do yield, do profit and figure it out. I did a presentation at the U of M, University of Manitoba, back about a year ago, and the student asked me the question, it's like, oh, Mike, you talk about like trade-offs and this and that. And it's like, so what's the trade-off with regenerative ag? And I didn't have a good answer that day, but it really is sort of thinking all these things through, but it's the complexity that can be a challenge, because there is more to think about, and like, say, intercropping as an example of adding complexity is there's lots of good reasons to do that, but the complexity is sewing two things together, dealing with weed control because you have maybe less options with herbicides. You have to separate those two crops, complexity. So part of our job too is to, try to make it work up here, is to help guys move through that complexity step by step without, biting off too much too quick.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. Can you give me some examples of these scenarios where you've helped guys walk through some of these steps? I think both of you said that you've been working together with different groups of producers since like 2019, and just kind of some examples of what is the need. Are you in a context where there's a lack of fence and water infrastructure around a lot of these row crop fields, and you're helping people at that level? Is that true in your neighborhood?
There's thousands of acres up here with no fences at all. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess, for a couple of specific examples, I can think of one producer we've worked with that, we showed him how to graze. He had cows and he's grazed his whole life, but he's never seen managed grazing before. And so we got him to understand the principles of that. And he began to move cattle across his landscape. And he just couldn't believe how easy it was, first of all, how much more grass he grew, and how he could see his land changing within a couple of years. And I guess the comment he makes is that, you guys put the fun back in farming. Well, to me, that's pretty powerful. That all of a sudden he's having fun doing this again. And I think we've missed that. We get our noses to the grindstone and it becomes drudgery almost. And I think we need to, the word agriculture, half of the word is culture. And I think we've really missed, the part of having fun, having our families want to be around it, having our grandchildren come back to the farm. Those are things that, are absolutely critical to success. And we've kind of lost that in our industrial approach to agriculture. And so I think that's one of the beauties of regeneration, is that we are starting to put, the importance of people and culture back into the farming systems. Plus, we're making profit. Plus, we're doing all the other good things for eco-goods and ecosystem services and goods. That's just phenomenal. So it's a win-win for everyone in society. Plus, for us as farmers, and it's great.
Yeah. That's one of the
You
things
mentioned.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, you mentioned, Clay, that we've been working with producers since 19, and maybe it's worth just quickly mentioning that's a project that was started with Understanding Ag and funding from General Mills. So General Mills, a big food company, they're looking in on agriculture and wanting to help be part of the solution. So they had us start working with 45 farms across Manitoba, eastern Saskatchewan, and a few farms in North Dakota, kind of up against the Canadian border. And our job was to help them implement soil health principles and regenerative practices, but also to build a community, like a culture. So part of what our job has been, maybe, if we've had one big success, is to bring those producers and those families, those farms together, where they're now solving problems on their own, and they're leading the way. We're learning from them because they're out there doing it every day. Our job, Blaine sort of uses the analogies, we're like bees that buzz around and pollinate all these farms now, and so that's been, an honor
Well,
for us
Michael,
to.
we're the ones that we're the bees that run around. We pick up all the good ideas and share them.
Yeah, and then we just pollinate them to these other farms. Yeah, spread the. So that's just been a great honor to be a part of that. But now they've formed their own community. We've set up things like WhatsApp groups and so on, and now guys, they'll have a problem and they'll just get on their phone and text to the group, and within minutes, many times, they've got an answer to their problem. It can be anything from, like, hey, I want to plant some hairy vetch with my corn, not sure how many pounds of hairy vetch, and someone will go, hey, I've been doing this for a few years, and I think this is 5 to 10 pounds is probably a good amount. So that's just been great to see that happen. And so our job now is really to sort of grow that regenerative community and bring in new producers that we can plug into this network, so they don't have to do all the hard learning on their own, and they can get up to speed. So in that sense, we're sort of speeding up biological time. So you think about it, the average farmer maybe has, if he has a good long farming career, he's got 40 or 50 at bats, growing seasons. That's not really a whole lot. But if you multiply that by 40 or 50 producers in a little network, that speeds things up a lot. So we've learned a great deal in just a short period of time.
Yeah,
This
that goes.
another
Go ahead, Blaine.
analogy, Clay, is sort of think of it like we took a stone and threw it into the puddle, and the ripples are starting to move out from that first little splash. And that's the power of regeneration. Pretty soon, the whole pond is going to be covered, but it'll take a while. But it's expanding, and that's, how fast it goes is irrelevant as long as we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and earlier on, one of you mentioned just that idea of regenerating people, regenerating relationships, regenerating communities. And, that's the first step, is to regenerate the circle closest to you. And so if you've got this network of other people who are in the farming world and they're doing it, and you can develop those connections within that, and then each of you also has a neighborhood of influence that can also benefit from this regeneration and be impacted by it, and then it continues to grow and grow, and that's just an encouraging place to be, right?
Yeah, and it's no doubt up here, anyways, where we are on the prairies, the fastest growing segment of prairie agriculture.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you understand, or do you know anything that of the net effect for, like, General Mills and the way that they have, maybe been able to change what they're providing, what they're doing, as a result of kind of the community that's developed there?
Well, I think part of their motivation was resiliency for their business model. If you depend on a model that needs oats going into a plant every single day and Cheerios coming out the other end, all of a sudden you have a major drought or flood or whatever kind of conditions that, climate change is creating, more extremes all the time. If that business model or the oat production fails, your business doesn't look very good. And so they realized that the only truly sustainable way of enabling that to be less risky is to build soil health, to build that resiliency into the soil. And so they were willing to invest the money to do this kind of pilot project to see if it would be successful. I don't know for sure what metrics they're using to determine what success is, but I think we've been quite successful in moving these guys along the regenerative path. And I
Well,
believe
one measure of success would be just, when we started with these 45 farms, it was a field. So, plus or minus 100-acre field, times 45 farms. But now we have all those farms times all their acres on that farm, more or less, right? So those good ideas have leaked out to the rest of the farm just by osmosis. So that's been a huge thing. But maybe acres isn't the best way to try to measure it. It's probably just that change in mindset. Like, if I think about some of the farms we've worked with, some were right in from day one. They had already embraced the concept and were good to go. Others, not so much in it, and it took a few years. But then one day you just show up, and you could tell they had changed. It took some time, but now, with that change of mindset, that farm is a completely different farm. It will never be the same. And we've had producers that have texted us and just kind of thanked us for, I think of one example, where a producer called and he was talking with a neighbor, big grain farmer, kind of struggling, not sure what to do. Spring's coming and prices weren't great, and the bank is on him and all this, and he's just depressed, and he would, so the producer we're working with was trying to help him out as best he could. And then he texted me afterwards, and it was just like a total different mindset. That neighbor down the road was struggling and having a hard time and unsure and anxious, and our producer was sitting there enjoying his farm. He did this, sort of his words, enjoying his farm, thinking about all the possibilities. And the reason for that was just that he looks at his farm differently now. Does that mean suddenly his life is perfect and no, of course not. But he's able to kind of think through and solve problems, and that, and that gives him like a positive sense of control over the future of his farm.
Yeah, no, that's a great place to be, and
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and maybe a great place to end. I don't know. Do you guys have other pieces of this and thinking about how regenerative agriculture works in the North that you think really need to be included here?
I think the biggest impediment is, I think it was Nicole Masters used this statement. There's two areas of compaction on a farm, one in the soil and the one from here to here. And it's between the ear one is the hardest one to fix. And once we get through and the farmer begins to understand the why of the principles, then we go ahead. But until that happens, it's very, very difficult to make progress. He may plant a cover crop because he could get a government program or something like that to get, $30 or $40 an acre, and he'll do it for 2 years. And when the government program stops, he stops. He didn't get it yet. And so we have to keep working and get them to understand the why. And that's very difficult. I think I should have studied psychology instead of agriculture. It would have been maybe more useful.
Yeah, no, I understand that for sure. Very good. Anything else, Michael?
Maybe just to summarize is that, like we said at the beginning, the principles work everywhere, and it's, if you think about it very simply, every farm everywhere in the world works with the same basic things: soil, rain, sun, plants, and animals. And when you start to understand how all that gets put together, ecosystem processes, energy cycle, harvesting sunlight, mineral cycle, soil and soil biology doing their thing, water cycle, how to capture water and hold on to it so that whether it's wet or dry, you're resilient to grow something green, and diversity, and then the principles and the adaptive rules, and get on that path where you're moving forward and everything's compounding, cascading in a positive direction. Then your farm's going to be profitable, and it's like the quote from Wendell Berry that I love and use quite a bit is that two things are important: the ecological health of the farm and the economic health of the farmer, and it has to be both at the same time. And that's where I think regenerative ag understands those two things, because it's hard to be green when you're in the red, when the bank is on you and you're not making money and not paying the bills. It's hard to care about the ecosystem processes, right? This is just the reality of our lives. But it must be both at the same time. And when you start to understand that, and what's cool is when producers start to think more about profit than just production, they start to do the right things ecologically. It almost sort of happens just second nature, kind of. Yeah. So that's been great to watch producers do that and build a resilient farm that, depending on weather or prices or what have you, that their farm is solid. That's great. It's great to have been, a small part of working with those farms and families.
Very good. Michael, Blaine, thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Very good stuff there with Michael and Blaine. Really appreciate them taking the time to join me on the Working Cows podcast. I'm very much looking forward to the next episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll be talking to Keith Burns of Green Cover Seed, and we're going to talk to him about regenerating hayfields. How do we take hayfields that have been, just industrial scale nutrient exportation over many decades in some cases, and sometimes with nothing being put back? How do we make them better? How do we regenerate them? And what are some of the things that he has seen work there at Green Cover Seed from that perspective? So looking forward to sharing that with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.